Good afternoon, everybody. This is Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our April 14th, 2022 legislative update coming from Washington, D.C., where the cherry blossoms are almost in full bloom. The tulips are in full bloom. This is the 2 to 3 weeks of actual nice weather we get here in D.C., and then it's all downhill. But for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be gorgeous here. So welcome to our update. As always, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, feel free to put them in the chat in the comments section on your screen, and we will rotate to them at the end of the presentation. And with that, we'll jump right in. Today is not a wonderful day in world history in a number of ways. Today is the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. More accurately, tonight is the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, and tonight is also the anniversary of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So not two of the better events in human history, but still worth remarking on. Here in Washington, all eyes are turning rapidly to the Competes Act, which we've talked about a number of times in the past. This is what we wanted to have happen. Competes is becoming the next big bill that Congress is going to try to pass. It seems to only have the ability to do one of these big bills at a time. And the next couple months are going to be Competes Act on center stage in Congress as they try to pass it, which is good. The consensus in Washington is that this is possibly the last big non-essential bill that Congress will pass before the end of the 117th Congress in December. The budget will pass. There's a couple of other must-pass bills. Competes is not a must-pass bill, but it is possibly the last major not essential bill that will get done this year, which is kind of cool. The bad news is the bill is rather far from being complete, and it's not anywhere near a condition for it to pass. Getting it there will be IEEE-USA's top legislative priority between now and probably September. Little note before we go on. Last time we talked about the fact that the Senate had replaced the Competes bill. The House passed Competes, sent it over to the Senate. The Senate received the House version and then amended it by deleting the entire text and putting Competes, IEEE-USA rather, in its place. What that means is technically IEEE-USA is dead and there is only the Competes bill. But we have two versions of the Competes bill. One is Competes from the House and one is IEEE-USA from the Senate, which has now been renamed Competes. I will continue to talk about IEEE-USA as if it still exists, simply because talking about two entirely different versions of the same bill gets very confusing. But we should note Competes is the bill at this point. But there are huge differences between the two bills, and so talking about them as if they were the same thing gets very complicated. Oops, too many slides. So the big news on Competes, the actual progress, is we have conferees. The legislators who will negotiate between the House and Senate versions to come up with a final compromise package have been named. There are 106 of them, which is a lot. It's about 20% of Congress, more or less. And what the leaders have done is they've taken Competes and they've broken it into pieces based on jurisdiction. So there are pieces of Competes that are technically the jurisdiction of just about every policy setting committee in Congress, with two exceptions, which we'll get to in a second. They then picked members, usually, not always, but usually the leaders of those committees, to negotiate the final language. Now, what this should allow them to do is to move the final version of Competes to the floor of the House and Senate for final passage without having to go back to any of the other committees. Basically, we're asking the leadership of the committees to agree on behalf of the committees, which in principle is not a bad idea. Now, the fact that we have conferees from literally every committee in the House and Senate, except the appropriation committees, which we'll get, and the budget and appropriations committee, which we'll get to in a second, as well as kind of the administrative committees like rules and oversight, rules and rather House administration and Senate administration, tells you just how big this bill is. There's a list of committees up there. I had originally planned on showing you a list of all the conferees, but there's 106 of them, so that didn't seem terribly useful. But generally, the chairs and ranking minority members of each one of these committees, plus a few other people, are on the list. The bottom line is this is going to be hard. This is going to be a very complicated, possibly very long negotiation to get all of these pieces, agreement between the four major negotiators. Remember, you have House negotiators, Senate negotiators, Republican negotiators, and Democratic negotiators. This bill is going to need at least some Republican support in the Senate to pass. It will probably need a little bit of support in the House as well, because it's unlikely all the Democrats will agree to whatever the final version is. And remember that Democrats can only lose 5 votes in the House before they lose their majority. So it's going to have to be bipartisan. They're going to have to overcome the filibuster in the Senate. There's a lot of work to do. The good news is they're starting on it. We have a list of conferees, and the discussions, if not the formal negotiations, have already started. Want to run through very quickly exactly what we're asking for in the bill. You've heard a lot of this before, but I want to go into a little more detail just to let you know what we're coming from. The big asks that we have are that the final version of the bill include the USICA language on regional technology hubs and workforce training. Regional technology hubs will be these new institutions that are set up around the country. 20 of them if USICA wins, 10 of them if COMPETES wins, or maybe somewhere in the middle. We prefer more. And the purpose of these hubs is to encourage innovation and innovative companies in parts of the country that are not Silicon Valley, Boston, or Austin. The COMPETES language on the regional tech hubs is good. And if that becomes the final version of the law, that's a good thing. USICA is better. And it is better primarily because USICA requires that these regional tech hubs be located in geographically diverse parts of the country. So they should be splattered all over the country in places that don't typically have a lot of innovation. Like I said, they're not going to be in Austin. They could be in El Paso. They're not going to be in Boston, but they could be in Maine. And we think that's important. I'll get to that in a minute. On workforce training, there is workforce training programs all over COMPETES and USICA. And generally speaking, the language is similar and good. Most of it focuses on university education and university training, particularly at the graduate and postdoc levels, which is good. I mean, obviously, we need graduate students. We need people with PhDs, and we need kids doing research. We need young professionals doing research after they receive their PhDs. However, IEEE-USA thinks that the innovation ecosystem also requires people at all other types of education and training. We need PhDs, but we also need people who just know how to build stuff. We need people who know how to just simply program, which is usually just an undergraduate degree. COMPETES focuses almost all of the workforce training programs at the PhD and the postdoc level. Again, we support that, but USICA is much broader. It reaches down to the apprenticeship level, to vocational training, to workforce training, community colleges, and undergraduate schools as well. And IEEE-USA thinks the broader training is more important. A couple reasons for this. First of all, we recognize that manufacturing is going to be crucial for the health of the U.S. innovation ecosystem, and you can't manufacture with just PhDs. You need a lot of other people, all of whom need specialized training, but many of whom don't need to actually, get a degree. They can just have the specialized training. Additionally, one of the purposes of COMPETES, and we think this is a good purpose, is to pull people into the STEM economy, pull communities into the STEM economy that up till now haven't really been there. This is reaching out to diverse populations, underserved parts of the American economy. We think the best way to do that is not to try to pull underserved communities into Silicon Valley, but to pull parts of Silicon Valley into underserved communities. And what we mean by that is asking someone from a community that doesn't produce really any engineers or scientists to say, hey, listen, we have this government program that will give you a scholarship to get a doctorate from a university you've never heard of in a state you've never been to so that you can apply to jobs for a company you're not aware of in a city you've also never been to, seems unlikely. Whereas if we say, hey, here's a training program to get you a certificate for a specific skill that you can use to get a job in the manufacturing plant right over there, seems a lot more likely. And so for those reasons, we prefer the USECA language to the competes language in the final version of competes. Other things we're focusing on, CHIPS Act, very important, and we got to have that. The new TIP Directorate. Now, we talked about this last time in the FY 2022 budget. Congress did create a new Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate within the NSF, but they didn't define it and they didn't fund it. We are asking them to do both, which USECA did. DOE Science of the Future Act and the Micro Act, both of which have been wrapped into competes, we think should be included. The NIST for the Future Act, a lot of future going on here in competes. Again, it's a standalone bill that's been rolled into competes. We think is important, particularly the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, Manufacturing USA programs, both of which, again, they're tech transfer programs that are designed to pull ideas out of our universities and move them into the rest of the country. And then there's a ton of different cybersecurity programs within the NSF program as well that we think are crucial. Lastly, there's a small provision in competes focusing on providing financial assistance to help small businesses get involved in international standards development programs. We think that's important to increase the diversity of voices involved in standards development, and it's also good for encouraging small businesses. So we are asking for all of those to be included in the final version of competes. On immigration, just very quickly, we are supportive of the STEM green card language in the House version of competes, but we think it should be edited a little bit to limit the green cards to just graduate degrees earned in the United States. There should be a job requirement. And basically, we're encouraging Congress to insert the Keep STEM Talent Act, which is a bill from Senator Durbin, in place of the House language. There's the same goal of the House language, but we just think it's written better. We are not enthusiastic about the W visa, and I don't think I mentioned this before. The W visa is a new temporary visa for entrepreneurs. It allows non-Americans who want to start a business in this country to get a W visa to give them a couple years to get the company going. Now, on paper, that sounds like a good idea. In practice, it probably isn't. In order to qualify for W visa, entrepreneurs would have to follow a fairly strict schedule of raising money, of producing products, increasing sales, and hiring staff. The problem is that's just not how starting a business works. Starting a business is way too risky. It's way too unpredictable to follow a strict government set schedule. Additionally, most new businesses fail, and that's just the way it works. The United States is really good at helping new businesses get going, specifically because we give people multiple chances to do it. You try to start a business, it fails, you generally can try again. The W visa doesn't allow that, because if your company fails, you got to leave the country. And unfortunately, that's exactly the point where you're more likely to succeed at starting your business. What we're telling Congress is don't go the temporary visa route with an entrepreneur. If you want more entrepreneurs, give grad students green cards, give them permanent legal status in the United States, and then just get out of their way. That seems to us to be a much more likely way to encourage small businesses than creating a very complicated temporary visa. All right, so what's next of all this? We expect the negotiations to go into May, hopefully wrapping up before Memorial Day. That's kind of an optimistic assessment, I think, but is possible. If that happens, that could allow, once a deal is negotiated, once all four major parties have agreed to a final bill, it will then move fairly smoothly to the floor of the House and the Senate, and it will probably pass. If it's not going to pass, then there is no deal. And so the concern is getting to that point, getting to a final version that is suitable to be brought up on the floor. There are some obvious roadblocks to this, some things that could come up that could stop the negotiations. Partisanship is, of course, the biggest problem. As we get closer to an election that the Republicans expect to win, and the conventional wisdom in Washington is that the Republicans will take the House in November, and is starting to look like they have a good shot at taking the Senate as well. The more they believe that, and of course, what actually is going to happen is irrelevant. It's what people expect to happen that matters. The more people expect the Republicans to take over, the less interested the Republicans and the Democrats will be in compromising. The Democrats will want to get all they can before they lose power. The Republicans won't want to give the Democrats a win, and they won't want to compromise because they can get more next year. So partisanship becomes a problem. We've started to see some intransigence on the part of the House leadership, and this may just be a negotiating ploy, which is fine. But we've heard from House leaders that they're kind of the opinion that the Senate should just pass their bill, which is not going to happen. And so, again, it might just be negotiating, which is okay. But if it's not, if the House is really digging in its heels, that could make compromise with the Senate rather difficult. There are ample opportunities for conferees to add poison pills to this bill. These are provisions that are popular with a small part of one of the political parties, but is absolutely out of the question for the other party. You could see language on abortion on either side, border security or fences or whatever, and in any number of other provisions, where if it gets into the bill, that's it. The bill's not going to pass. And there are a number of legislators that would like that to happen for various reasons. And so it's important that those all be kept out if we want the bill ultimately to pass. Then there's the issue of extraneous legislation. As we've talked about in previous years, it's getting really hard to pass just small bills through Congress. They just don't seem to be able to do it anymore. And so everybody wants to attach their bill to something else, a big bill that is going to pass. And DAA is typically used for that purpose. If people begin to think that competes is going to pass, there will be pressure put on legislators to add their little bills to it. Now, depending on what the bill is, that might not be a problem, but every time you add a new bill, it attracts opposition. And if you add the wrong little bill, you can end up killing the big bill. We've started to hear that some groups are starting to ask for very ambitious things in the competes bill. Specifically, they're asking for appropriations in the bill. Now, the CHIPS Act is actually an appropriations bill. It appropriates and authorizes money, but the Appropriations Committee have already signed off on it. The fact that there are no appropriators, there are appropriators, but the appropriations committees haven't been asked to send representatives to talk about the competes bill tells us that the leaders of the Appropriations Committee have signed off on the bill moving forward as is, which includes CHIPS appropriations language. Some groups have interpreted that as it's open season on adding appropriations language to the bill. The problem with that is that if that starts to happen, the appropriators can step back up and say, whoa, 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 we signed off on this, we didn't sign off on that. If you want to move this bill with that appropriations language in it, you need to run it through our committee. And if that happens, the bill is in serious jeopardy because the biggest roadblock we have is time. This is the second year of a Congress. There will be election on November 8th of this year. And so January 1st-ish, this Congress goes away, along with any unpassed legislation. We only have about 11 weeks, which is a decent amount of time, but not an unlimited amount of time. We only have about 11 legislating weeks between now and August. August, Congress takes off. September is mostly about the fiscal 23 budget. Congress takes October off to try to keep their jobs. November is the election. Now we're into mid-November, Thanksgiving in December, and there's not a lot of time left. We probably need to have the Competes Act ready or basically ready to be voted on by 4th of July. I think that's a reasonable deadline to get this done. And there's not a lot of weeks between here and there. And as negotiations go on, as negotiations get more complicated, if we start running into delays, we don't have a lot of spare time. And I think ultimately that is the biggest risk to our bill. Moving on to a couple other little things. Fiscal 23 budget, Congress is starting to work on it. It really hasn't done much work that we can see yet, but the discussions are starting to go. The appropriations committees are working on, the budget committees rather, are working on the top line numbers. Appropriators are starting to figure out where things will go. The big question on the budget is this going to be a status quo budget, meaning things basically stay the same, an increase for inflation, and that's a big issue because when inflation is running at 7 or 8%, that's a big plus up just to keep up. So, but do we want to keep things basically where they are, or does Congress want to go big with big increases in a lot of budgets? And legislators are arguing over that now. We don't know how things are going to go. We thought they were going to go big last year. They ended up not doing that. My initial guess is that they won't do it again this year, but it's a long way till September, so we'll have to see. A little note, the State Department has opened a new cyber bureau, the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Privacy, which is designed to encourage responsible state behavior in cyberspace and advance policies that protect the integrity and security of the infrastructure of the internet. I bring this up because they are looking for technical experts to help the State Department understand cyber threats and opportunities in cyberspace, which may be of some interest to IEEE members. A little follow-up on a little political news that I mentioned last time. The Democratic Party is now having an open public debate over how they are going to do their primary process in 2024, which is really starting in 2023. Nevada has now openly begun lobbying the Democratic leadership to make them the first primary of 2024. Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina are not happy about that, as are some other states who are hoping to get into the fray here. It has become an oddly public fight, considering there really is no way for the party to win this. I am certain, by the way, the Republicans are having precisely the same fight. They've just kept it very quiet so far. The problem is parties can't win because some state has to go first, and whoever goes first is going to irritate the other 49 states. In the case of 2024, I think it's important for the Democrats to keep the decision until after the November election, because the Democrats are protecting Senate seats in both New Hampshire and Nevada. Those two Senate seats held by Democrats are both considered toss-up seats at the moment. New Hampshire maybe not quite at the toss-up level, but they're still at risk. If the Democrats decide before this November's election that either Nevada or New Hampshire will go first, it could, in theory, hurt their candidate in the other one. And the Democrats probably have to hold both seats if they want to hold the Senate. So I don't expect resolution on this until after November, but they're going to have to reach a resolution relatively soon thereafter, because the presidential primary fight will actually heat up pretty much right after you get into 2023. IEEE-USA's Congressional Visits Day is mostly done. Most of our meetings happened last week. In the end, we had about 280 participants, meeting with 45% of Congress, including 78% of the United States Senate. All of those are a little lower than what I reported last time because some people had to pull out. We also have some meetings that are scheduled to happen next week and the week after that, which is great. That's the benefit of a virtual meeting. You don't have to do it on one day. But it was by far the largest event we've ever done. Great thank you to all of the folks that participated, all the IEEE members that gave some time and energy to representing us with their legislators. And I would invite you all to pay attention right after New Year's in 2023, when we will announce our fly-in for next year. And I hope you will all join us. Next update will be April 28th. just after Congress returns from their Easter break, and we should begin to have a clearer sense of how the competes negotiation will go. There's a few other things that should be on the table by then, like the antitrust movement, like digital privacy rights, that we'll be able to talk about. Again, remind you to add any questions or comments into the comment section. We already have a few up that I will go turn to in just a moment. But I'm Russ Harrison. My phone number is 202-530-8326. My email is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Feel free to reach out anytime if I, my staff, or IEEE can be of service. And with that, I will turn to the comment section. Which compete issue will be the most difficult to resolve? That's an interesting question, Brendan. I don't actually know. The big issue in competes is the CHIPS Act. And you will note that I didn't spend a lot of time on it. And the reason I didn't spend a lot of time on it is for the same reason that IEEE-USA isn't spending a lot of time on it. It's in both bills. It's basically the same in both bills. There's not a lot of opposition to it on Capitol Hill, so I don't think there's any chance of it not being in the final bill, if there is a final bill. Of the issues that I talked about, I think immigration is going to be tough. Immigration is always tough. The question is whether the Republicans simply say no, at which point we will advise that Congress drop it. There's too many other good things in the bill to tank the whole bill because of immigration, although obviously we would love to have the immigration language included. The other things that we talked about are pretty niche issues that probably won't hold up the bill. There's some tax language that we don't care about that could be a problem. There is a massive amount of language on tariffs in there, like 25 pages in the bills, that will take some time. Again, that's not something we care about, but it could slow things down. But that's kind of the problem with the Competes Act. It is really a bundle of several hundred only loosely related policies. And any of them could become a major sticking point. At any point, the Democrats could say, no, we're not passing the bill unless that's in there. And the Republicans could say, we're not voting for the bill if that's in there. And then that's it. If both parties stick to it, the whole bill blows up. And that's really the risk now. It's not any particular highly contentious provision. It's 100 potentially highly contentious provisions, any one of which could trip us up at this point, which is kind of terrifying. But we'll see what we can do about this. Don, yeah, you're pretty much where we are. STEM graduate green cards only going to graduates of accredited U.S. universities. Yeah, that's the problem. Now, the procedural problem we have is that technically when you conference two bills, you're not supposed to add new language. You're supposed to pick language from this one or that one, or find a number in the middle if it's a budget number or something like that. The problem is because there's no immigration language in the Senate, the only thing they have to talk about is the House. And technically, that means they're supposed to either take the House language or not take the House language, but they're not supposed to amend the House language. Now, they do it all the time, but it does add a wrinkle to the negotiations. But yeah, Don, we are suggesting they do exactly what you propose. Yolanda, that is precisely the hope. So the way this is going to work is if we can get the Competes Act passed, the next thing we're going to have to do is go to Congress as they start working on the FY 2023 budget, which they're working on now, but probably won't do a lot on until September, and say, okay, guys, you just passed this bill. Now you got to fund it. And that will be the next fight. And it's going to be a tough one. But that's how we have to do it. Congress isn't going to fund these programs if they haven't been created. So we have to create them and then get the money from them. But that will also be a fight. AI investments, that's an appropriations debate. And like I said, the FY 2023 budget really hasn't gotten going yet. AI is very hot on Capitol Hill. There are a number of relatively small AI bills, some of which we are working aggressively. There is a bill that was just introduced last week, or earlier this week, excuse me, it was last week. It was the end of last week, on AI ethics and arguing or requiring the federal government to develop a system to make sure AI systems the government uses are ethical, they're unbiased, and they're based on good data and good rules for using that data. In the overall scheme of things, it's a fairly small bill, but Congress is really focusing on AI and how to do it right. There are a number of provisions in competes dealing with AI. They tend not to be terribly exciting, but they're there. And AI will be in the FY 2023 budget, and we'll be working on it there as well. AI was also in the 2022 budget, which just passed a couple weeks ago, which is why they're not talking a lot about it now, because they just did, and they want to talk about something else for a while. But it is there. And my producer, Jonathan Cho, has pointed out, please subscribe to our Washington update list if you want to be reminded about these updates, particularly if things happen and we do kind of a special update on the appropriations or on competes. It is possible that competes moves to the floor very quickly, in which case we may do an emergency update just to let you know, to give you a chance to weigh in with your legislators. So please do sign up for the reminders so that we can keep you as updated as possible. And I do not see more questions. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Hope you have a lovely spring. Wish everyone a happy Passover, happy Easter, and look forward to talking with you all again on April 28th. Have a great afternoon.
My superpower is engineering. I've been a roboticist almost all my life now. I think engineering is just as creative as the arts. Engineers, we solve problems. It impacts the world. It makes a difference. Without IEEE, I don't think I would have the network that I have. Anyone can get involved with IEEE-USA at any time. There's an immense amount of value for anyone at any career stage.